Does Sheepstealer die in Fire and Blood? The Truth Explained. Warning, spoiler warning. Before we begin, this video contains major spoilers for House of the Dragon Season 3, Episode 7, and George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood. We'll be discussing Sheepstealer's fate in the books, what happens after the Dance of the Dragons, and why the TV series may ultimately tell a very different story. With that said, let's get started. One of the biggest questions after House of the Dragon Season 3, Episode 7 is surprisingly simple. Does Sheepstealer eventually die? After surviving an incredible battle against Syrax, Seasmoke, and even Caraxes, many fans naturally assumed the wild dragon wouldn't survive much longer. But if you've read Fire and Blood, the answer might surprise you. Because unlike Vhagar, Caraxes, Malesis, Sunfire, or many of the other famous dragons of the dance, George R.R. Martin never actually tells us how Sheepstealer dies. In fact, one of the most mysterious dragons in Targaryen history simply disappears. So, what really happened? Let's break it all down. The first thing to know is that Sheepstealer does not have a confirmed death in Fire and Blood. That's one of the biggest misconceptions among fans. Most dragons in the dance receive dramatic endings. Some die in battle. Some are killed by other dragons. Others fall during the storming of the dragon pit. But Sheepstealer doesn't receive any of those endings. Instead, the dragon survives the Dance of the Dragons and then quietly vanishes from the historical record. For a series that carefully documents the fate of almost every major dragon, that's incredibly unusual. So, where does Sheepstealer go? To answer that, we need to talk about Nettles. In Fire and Blood, Sheepstealer isn't claimed by Rhaena Targaryen like in the television series. Instead, the wild dragon bonds with Nettles, a young dragon seed who earns Sheepstealer's trust by feeding the dragon sheep every single morning. Unlike most dragon riders, Nettles doesn't tame Sheepstealer through Valyrian blood or magical destiny. She earns the dragon's trust through patience, day after day, until eventually Sheepstealer accepts her. It's one of the most unique dragon rider relationships in all of Westeros. Later in the story, everything changes. Queen Rhaenyra becomes increasingly suspicious of those around her. Influenced by growing paranoia and court intrigue, she declares Nettles a traitor and orders her execution. But before the order can be carried out, Daemon secretly warns Nettles. Instead of staying to fight, Nettles understands exactly what she must do. She feeds Sheepstealer one final sheep, mounts the wild dragon, and disappears into the sky. Neither of them is ever captured. Neither of them is ever reported dead. They simply vanish. So, where do they end up? According to later accounts in Fire and Blood, there are stories placing Sheepstealer and Nettles high in the mountains of the moon in the Vale. Travelers, hunters, and mountain clans begin telling strange stories. They speak of a mysterious woman living deep in the mountains, a woman accompanied by a dragon. Some call her the Fire Witch. According to these tales, anyone foolish enough to climb too close to her cave risks being driven away by dragon fire. But here's the interesting part. No maester can ever prove these stories are true. They're treated as legends, rumors passed from one generation to another. Were they real, or were frightened villagers simply creating myths? George R.R. Martin never gives us a definitive answer. Years later, one account claims that armed men tried to investigate the cave where the mysterious woman supposedly lived. According to the story, Sheepstealer was still there, but before anyone could approach, the dragon took flight with its rider and disappeared deeper into the mountains. After that, history falls silent. No confirmed sightings, no recorded death, no final battle. Nothing. That naturally raises another question. Why would George R.R. Martin leave such an important dragon story unfinished? Many fans believe it was completely intentional. Unlike the great dragons that died fighting over crowns, Sheepstealer represents freedom. The dragon never truly belonged to kings, or queens, or castles. Allowing Sheepstealer to disappear preserves that image. the last great wild dragon escaping the endless cycle of Targaryen wars. It's a surprisingly hopeful ending in a story filled with tragedy. Of course, that also creates another mystery. Could Sheepstealer still have been alive centuries later? The answer is probably no. While dragons in George R.R. Martin's world can live for an incredibly long time, they aren't immortal. There's no evidence that Sheepstealer survives all the way to the events of Game of Thrones. The most reasonable conclusion is that the dragon eventually died naturally somewhere in the mountains. The difference is, no one was there to witness it. No maester recorded it. No history book tells us when it happened. So, technically, Sheepstealer's final fate remains unknown. Now here's where things become even more interesting. House of the Dragon has already made one enormous change to this storyline. Instead of introducing Nettles as Sheepstealer's rider, the show gives that role to Rhaena Targaryen. That's not a small change. It's one of the biggest departures from Fire and Blood. And because of that, the television series isn't required to follow the book's mysterious ending. If Rhaena remains closely tied to Sheepstealer, the writers could decide to give the dragon an entirely different fate. Maybe Sheepstealer survives exactly as in the books. Maybe the dragon dies in a future battle. Or maybe the show creates an ending that no reader of Fire and Blood has ever seen. For the first time, even longtime book fans don't know exactly what will happen next. Perhaps that's why Sheepstealer has become one of the most fascinating dragons in the entire franchise. Unlike dragons whose stories end in spectacular battles, Sheepstealer's greatest achievement may simply be surviving. Never fighting for a throne, never becoming another casualty of royal ambition, just disappearing into the wilderness, leaving behind nothing but legends. And sometimes, the greatest legends are the ones that never receive a final chapter. Final thoughts. So, does Sheepstealer die in Fire and Blood? Surprisingly, no confirmed death is ever recorded. Instead, George R.R. Martin leaves the wild dragon's fate completely open. After escaping with Nettles, Sheepstealer becomes part history, part legend, and part mystery. Some believe the dragon spent its final years hidden in the mountains of the Vale. Others think the stories of the Fire Witch were only myths. But no one truly knows. And perhaps that's exactly how George R.R. Martin intended it. Not every story needs a definitive ending. Sometimes, the greatest mysteries are the ones left unsolved. Now, House of the Dragon has changed that story by making Rhaena the writer instead of Nettles. That means Sheepstealer's fate on television could be completely different from the books. Whether HBO preserves the mystery or gives the wild dragon an entirely new ending is something we'll have to wait and see. So what do you think? Should House of the Dragon keep Sheepstealer's mysterious ending from Fire and Blood? Or would you rather see the wild dragon receive a completely new conclusion? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more House of the Dragon explained videos, dragon lore, hidden details, ending breakdowns, and Fire and Blood deep dives.